Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first and only episode of the Bree Tanner novella, The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner, which we have read 100% of this week because it's a whopping 173 pages. So, uh, yeah, let's jump in. First, Amy, did you like this more or less than Eclipse?
It's hard to compare them. I can, I guess, because I gave them both ratings when I finished them. I gave them the same rating. But I feel like it's also hard to compare because it's like barely involved with the other story. I mean, it is, but it isn't. Like, it's just a lot different in these vampires, or a lot different than the vampires that we see and that sort of thing. So it felt like a really separate thing.
Yeah, yeah. Just story wise, do you feel like you enjoyed one more than the other?
Um, I feel like I enjoyed this because it wasn't as much of the teenage drama crap. And it wasn't like at the height of where there's going to be this battle and then they just like get into this stupid fight and
Mhm.
assault one another and that sort of thing.
Yeah, same. It's obviously a novella, so it's way shorter. And so I feel like I'm less invested generally in shorter stories. But yeah, I also liked it more because there wasn't all the dumb nonsense. It was just a fantasy book.
Yeah. I also actually really like short stories. Like, yeah, I don't know. So
Oh,
I
really?
enjoyed this. But
Yeah. It was nice to hold the book and be like, oh, like I feel like I was more motivated because I was like, oh, I'm already like two-thirds done, and you'd been reading a couple hours, you know?
yeah.
So that's nice. A quick one if you're trying to add to your reading count this year, just a quick little novella for you.
I was behind on my reading count up until when we had a week off between episodes, and I read almost the entire series of Throne of Glass. So now I have surpassed my reading goal, so that's good.
Incredible. This was my first book that pushed me past my reading goal, but I was really far ahead on my reading goal. And so I realized like I've barely been reading since we started the podcast.
Same,
I've
same.
just been reading Twilight. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um yeah. Okay, how far are you in Throne of Glass? Have you started the tandem read?
I've started the tandem read, but I'm not too far into the tandem read. So, yeah.
I finished the series earlier this year. Like, I think it was my first couple books of the year in January. And I read a lot this year. And I've been dying for my friends to read Throne of Glass. And now I finally have four friends all at the same time reading it, but you're all at different places. And it's a
Ah,
lot to mentally keep track of for
I know.
spoilers.
I have stayed like it took me like a long time to get through Sarah J. Maas books because I remember I started reading ACOTAR before you did. Like I started ACOTAR like last summer, and
I started reading Sarah J. Maas because she's like,
yeah.
I really like it. You should read A Court of Thorns and Roses. And then I finished the series. And did I finish all of her books before you finished A Court of Thorns and Roses as a series?
I don't think I finished like A Court of Thorns and Roses the very, very beginning of this year, like in I think January I finished it. So
So I'd finished two of her series. Was halfway through Throne of Glass. Anyways, what a time. What a time. I'm so excited for you, and I'm also sad you're going to have to read Crescent City after this because it's so much worse. Sorry, everyone. Crescent
I
City
know
is
I've really liked Throne of Glass, probably more than ACOTAR. So
yeah, it's so good. The ending. I didn't like the beginning more. But anyways, that's not the books we're here to talk about.
Twilight, the series neither of us really like anymore.
Yeah, I also read a whole book on our week off. And it's funny because I was the one who pushed for us to take basically every break we've taken has been me pushing. Amy's been like, it's fine, we can keep going. But I was like, I'm so burnt out on these books.
I'm
And
so glad we had a break. I needed a break. Did not
yeah,
realize how much I needed a break.
I need a break, and I'm really glad we took a break, and I'm really glad that we read the novella before getting into Breaking Dawn because I think I'm really burnt out on this series. I like cannot read another YA fantasy for a long time after
That
this.
being said, we are going to take another break next week,
No,
just
yeah,
so everyone knows.
before the original plan was to do a week break between every book. Um, but then with holiday timing, we just did it between new moon and eclipse. Um, but yeah, it is ironic because I was like, I need a break. Things are so busy. But then I read an entire book during that week, even though it's been taking me like what feels like 8 weeks to read 150 pages of Twilight. And then I read, a good 700-page book in less time
Yeah.
this
I feel
weekend.
like it's also difficult with this because, like, I always have to, well, one, I can't do an audiobook for this because I have to actually read because I'm taking notes on it. And then the taking notes takes up so much time too. Like, it's more time
Yeah,
than you think it would be.
yeah, it is true. I also we've talked about this before, but I get so much more distracted. Like, I hate that if I open my phone at all, the odds I remember why I opened my phone, it's just so bad. Like, if I don't open my phone into my notes app, that is for the book we're taking notes on. It could be 15 minutes before I put that note in, you know? So that's what I've learned. I don't like taking notes. I think the dyslexia plus ADHD, like I have to be like totally zoned into my reading, or it just takes me a long time to read.
Sure.
Anyways, yeah. So that's that. Let's jump on in to the short second life of Bree Tanner.
I also
I
keep wanting to say The Secret Life, and then I think of The Secret Life of the American Teenager. It's happened to me so many times.
um yeah, Will, my husband, kept saying the brief second life of Bree Tanner, and for a while I was like, wait, is that the title? No, it's not. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is I picked up this copy from a used bookstore. Actually, it's what prompted this entire podcast is we found every Twilight book except for Life and Death at a used bookstore when we were together. And I was like, let's do a podcast. Anyways, here it is. Okay, so if you are listening, I will read what the little sticker on this cover says. $1 from each book will be donated to the American Red Cross, which upon reading this, my initial thought was, are they donating for like blood? Like, like
That's
funny.
what I thought.
Yes, which I thought was so funny. Like, because this book is about them murdering all these people. Like that. What? That's so funny. And honestly, that would be so iconic of Stephenie Meyer's. But no,
That's a,
that's
that would have
that's
been good.
what this is, because it explains on the back cover here, which is specifically also one. I don't know. I thought it was like $1 from every book, and I was excited. Apparently, it was only $1 from every book from the first printing that donated $1, which probably is still a lot of money because
Yeah.
they probably printed a lot of books. It's a big series. Anyways, but that's how I found out this is a first printing, so that's kind of cool. Um, yeah, apparently it was specifically for relief for Haiti, which I'm guessing was like I was trying to think of the timing, and I think that was like a big crisis when this was published. So yeah, that does check out. Yeah, specifically disaster relief for Haiti and Chile. is what the back says.
Yeah, I think that's when they had earthquake in Haiti.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just looked it up because it was 2010, wasn't it? I'm pretty sure that's when it was.
Mhm.
Yeah.
10. Yeah. Anyways, so that's like interesting, and I guess Stephenie Meyers just wanted to get involved and help, which is great, but I thought it was so iconic that it was all going to a blood bank. So
I definitely thought that when you said that. I'm like, oh, that's kind of funny. Like,
yeah,
it's not
I thought it
it's
was
funny.
so funny. I thought it was so funny. Anyway, so Stephenie, we know you're an avid listener, so just you know, keep that in mind for the next book you release. Okay. Do you want to jump into the in? I have one note on the intro, and then Amy, do you want to kind of explain how we're going to run this podcast because there are no chapters in this whole book?
Yeah, so Callie started reading the book before I did and was like, you should think about it when you're reading how we want to do the podcast since we normally do chapters. And I was like, I did not realize that. That's an excellent point.
Mhm.
So I looked up and found on supersummary.com a little plot summary of the book, which has one, two, three, four, five, six, like 6 to 8 paragraphs about the book, and we're just gonna read one paragraph at a time and then talk about it and then read another one and go from there. But we'll start with the introduction.
Great, great, great. Okay. I felt like this intro was a little cruel. Like, I mean, it wasn't. It was fine. I'm talking about specifically Stephenie Meyers talking about writing this book. I think
Yeah,
that's the intro, right? Yeah. Okay. I was
yeah,
just making sure there wasn't like
yeah.
another intro. Yeah.
No, I'm curious why you
Um,
thought it was cruel though.
I mean, just because it felt like the whole thing was this like pitch for how much she wanted us to love the character of Bree Tanner, just for all of us to go into the book knowing that she's gonna get like absolutely murdered at the end, you know? Like it's just sad. Like we know it's a novella, end of story. There's no hope, you know? So I just thought it was funny that Stephenie Meyers did such a like like a plea for us to want to love Bree Tanner as much as she ended up loving her. I just think it's funny, even though I did. I really liked her as a character. And I thought she was honestly so much more dynamic than Bella. And I'm just realizing as we're talking about it, it goes back to my, I think I just generally, if you have a smart female protagonist, I like her. And Bella is kind of a dum dum in the kindest way. She's like an empathetic dum dum, you
The
know?
funny thing is, I feel like we could have a clip right here going back to early episodes where you were talking about Bella being smart, and I was kind of like,
I didn't want her to be dumb, but now we're so far along and she's making worse choices every book. Like I can't deny it anymore.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting
Oh,
that that's how you took the introduction because I didn't really think about it from that perspective. I think I just, which I think that's totally valid, but um, I was just thinking that it was an interesting, like, I don't know, it was very different than other introductions you get, and I kind of liked that she gave us kind of an insight to her process, but I also was kind of surprised by her process because she talked about how when she was writing Twilight, she really focused on Bella's perspective and her perspective alone. And so then this, like, she was focusing on Bree's perspective. And it just kind of surprised me that it was like in her editing that she thought more about like the plot and other perspectives. Cause I'm like, isn't that really important? But that kind of holds up to like the things that we call out. I'm like, I don't know if that's the best way to write a book. Like, that's not how I do it, but.
yeah. Yeah, I did also think this, where it's like Twilight is just about the characters, it's about your connection to the characters. It is not a plot, world building driven fantasy. And I think that's the stuff both of us like, a plot that really engages us, dynamic characters, and cool world building. I think is why both of us have been redrawn into fantasy as adults over other genres. And so I just think like she's basically like, that's not how I wrote this fantasy. And it just confirms to me this is barely a fantasy, you know?
I think that's true.
Yeah, yeah. I do like, though, I will agree, I liked getting some insight into her writing process. It feels like to me, this is something people have mixed opinions about, but I know me and Amy feel the same. When you go to a concert and the artist talks a lot, I love that. I love that. I want to hear every thought you had about making this song. I want to hear why you wrote it. All the things like that makes it worth going to a concert to me, to feel like I get this inside look. And so the intro, how it was written, felt like that from the author. And we just haven't gotten that a lot. Like her acknowledgments are not really that at the ends of the books. Her intros are normally just a foreshadowing moment of death that's coming in the book. So yeah, it was good.
Except in this one where we knew the person died.
Right. So then she talked about the book.
Yeah. That is kind of funny.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's enough on the intro and the cover. Why don't you give us the first paragraph of the summary?
Yeah, okay. The story begins with Bree, a newly made vampire of about 15 years of age, on a hunt in Seattle with several other vampires who are part of a larger gang led by a vampire named Riley. Bree fled her home and barely survived as a runaway before being turned. Bree is unimpressed with two of her hunting partners, but the third, Diego, catches her eye as smarter than the others. She pairs up with Diego and they successfully attack and kill two prostitutes and their pimp. Bree and I know it's just really, I don't know if they even use those words in the book, I don't think, but maybe
I
they
think
did.
that was the word pimp, and I don't think they called them
I think
prostitutes.
they kept using the word dregs. But
Yeah.
Bree and Diego were turned into vampires by the same person, Victoria, who they refer to as her. Riley is Victoria's second in command. After feeding, they hide in a cave and talk about their past lives before they became vampires, and then they discuss their mutual dissatisfaction with Riley's leadership. They both think Riley and Victoria are using them and lying to them. The sun comes up, but instead of killing them, as they assumed, it simply makes their skin sparkle.
Great. Great, great. All right. Um, I think that was a decent summary and a good chunk to start
Yeah,
talking about. So I think this will go well.
yeah.
My
I Oh, go ahead.
my first note is that she's already a freaking vampire when the book
Exactly
starts.
what I was about to say. Exactly. I was disappointed that it started off with her already being a vampire.
Like, I wanted it to start in her human life and like
Yep.
talk about what was going on in her tragic human life that
Yep.
made her get turned.
Yeah, it starts when she was turned 3 months ago, we learned. So I was not expecting that.
No, it starts like so far into the story.
hmm
Like, it could have started a good 6 months earlier and I would have been happy. But
Well, I was shocked when we got like 3/4 of the way through the book was when like the fighting scene started, and I'm like, we still have a quarter of the book and she's about to die. Like,
yeah,
but it like went into a lot of detail then, which I guess makes sense. But I was surprised.
yeah, it was very quick paced. Like, this is like a couple weeks that we.
If even, it might just be a couple days, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might literally be like 6 days, this
Because I
book.
mean, they're like when they go and follow them, that's like 4 days before they go and attack. And yeah, I think this is less than a week.
Crazy. Classic Stephenie Meyer, though. Her pacing is all over the place. It's either the whole book is like a couple months or, half the, like, two chapters were half a year, there's no in between.
It's very true.
Anyway, yeah,
Or you have a chapter that is a whole month long that has no words in it. Looking at
true.
you.
Yeah, it was more than a month. It was like
Yeah,
every.
it's like 3 months there each page. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Anyways, yeah. Um, Okay, so we open with Bree hunting, and she is with Kevin and
The
someone.
Spider-Man kid that she never knows his name.
Right. right. And Diego, and they're being not Diego, Kevin and Spider-Man are being just real dum-dums, very cavalier, very obvious. No one has told them any rules about being vampires, whatever. I thought it was specifically funny that then Kevin decides to act like the Hulk, like they're both using their vampire powers to pretend to be their favorite superheroes. And this scene is just like, yeah, you take trauma baby teenage boys and turn them into immortal superpower vampires. Like, that checks, you know?
I did feel like these vampires were a more realistic depiction of what vampires would be like in the like real world if that were to actually happen. Like I'm like, yep, that seems about right.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so we find out that Riley has told them when they're hunting to pick people who won't be missed. Um, and I thought it was interesting. Bree has a thought during this time where she says that's the same reason he picked us. Like the same people they chose to hunt and kill were the same people that, in like her words, they turned from dregs to gods from the same people. And it was just kind of the whim of who wouldn't be missed and when he needed new vampires versus when they were hungry. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I I thought it made sense, but I'm also like, I find it just hard to believe that you could get that many people in one city and not have it be noticed. And obviously it was noticed, but like they were trying their best not to do that. But
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Seattle's like a decently large city, and like if you're specifically targeting like homeless populations or people using or something like that, like
see, but then a lot of them could be from the same population and the other people would
yeah,
know. Yeah.
yeah,
Like, I mean, I think it makes the most sense out of like to target anybody, like that it'd
yeah,
be the least noticed, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Mm. Um, yeah. We then like the book said, then Riley, nope, Bree and Diego go off on their own and they get some prostitutes and their pimp whatever. Apparently, I did want to look up in the book if it says that. I'm pretty sure it calls him a pimp, but I don't think it calls the girls
Here, I'll look
prostitute.
because I
They
have
have
my Kindle so I can search by word. Let's see. Pimp. 4 results found, so they did use the word pimp.
great.
They did not use the word prostitute.
Okay, yeah. It is, I mean, when you say pimp, with the women he's beating in an alley.
It says from their clothes, I guess that it was a pimp and 2 of his employees is the words used. That's pretty funny, actually.
Anyways, they kill them, and then I thought it was like kind of intense. They take the bodies and then swim into the ocean in Puget Sound and lift up a boulder to put them under. Like that felt so over the top details. Like
Yeah. I mean, I feel like they were trying to be really clear that they were like hiding them well and that they like were trying to like be under the radar compared to like Kevin and the other kid. But yeah, it was kind of a crazy detail. And then my mind totally wandered there and I'm like, couldn't some vampires just live underwater if they wanted to? Why don't they do that? Like, that's where my mind went. So,
we'll talk more about it later.
yeah.
They tell Riley they spend a whole day underwater.
Yeah.
Wild.
I'm like, if I turned into a vampire, I'd become a vampire mermaid. That sounds cool.
I wouldn't because the ocean kind of scares me.
But I feel like it's not scary when you're a vampire, you know? Because then, like, what's going to kill you when you're a vampire, you know?
Killer whale, they're the scariest thing in the ocean.
If you were a vampire, I don't think so.
I
A person, absolutely. Absolutely. But You think
They
Edward
kill,
Cullen
they
could be
kill,
killed by a killer whale?
yes, 100%. They kill great white sharks. They
Yeah,
hunt
but
in teams.
I
They're
feel like a
terrified.
vampire is more invincible than one of
Let's
the.
ask, let's ask ChatGPT.
Oh, I love where this podcast episode's going.
This is important.
It is. No, I
Okay.
feel like this is going to be one of those classic arguments we have all the time now about if a vampire can survive different things. I'm surprised we haven't had this conversation on the podcast already, to be honest.
Honestly. Ugh, Puget Sound. I thought about being at this Seattle aquarium and which is right like
Yeah,
on
I
the
also was
water.
thinking of that. Yeah.
Yeah. What? I don't want my own app for this. Guys, I'm on
Yeah, I
Gemini.
have a chat GPT. I'm going to put vampire versus killer whale. Who wins?
In a fight of a vampire versus a killer whale pod, who would win? We'll see.
On land, the vampire would. That's hilarious. Oh, it does killer whales, but I still disagree.
Mm,
Also, I wasn't thinking about a whole pod of them necessarily.
obviously a pod. Their teamwork is part of what makes them scary, Amy. Oh,
That was an excellent quote right there. Their teamwork is what makes them scary.
true.
Okay, I'm going to clarify. What about a vampire from the Stephenie Meyer universe?
Yeah, I need to also because here it says that vampires are vulnerable to water, so they couldn't survive in the
Yeah.
ocean. But that's not true in this world.
Oh, it says the orca has the upper hand while the vampire could likely survive. It would be a significant disadvantage in the water.
I told you. Okay, hold on. I'll ask Gemini. Can you update this fight to make the vampires from the Stephenie Meyer's Twilight universe?
See, I guess I was just thinking about like them killing it, and it says that the vampire could likely survive, which is kind of what I was thinking of. Okay, this is such a tangent. We need to get.
Yeah, I hate that it keeps telling me the vampires would win on land. Obviously.
So stupid. So stupid.
My notes aren't in the book. All right, back to my notes. Anyways, that's what I thought about spooky, spooky killer whales in Seattle. Spooky, spooky. Would not be there if I was a vampire. Amy would, and she would die, and that would
Well, I
kill me.
wouldn't just like go up to some killer whales.
You live in the ocean. They would
I think
find
the ocean's pretty big. It's pretty easy to avoid them. This,
I don't know.
sorry, I think this is the most heated we've gotten up. Okay.
Surprise, surprise. Okay. After they're done hiding the bodies, Diego wants a high five, which Bree finds very strange. I really liked this detail of Diego like he continuously is just trying to be like a dude, and she's like, that's really weird. Why would you keep acting like you were a human once?
Yeah. I did find it interesting though, because I feel like we're so used to the Cullens who act like they're humans all the time that I'm like, this is probably more normal for most vampires, you know? Like,
Totally.
so.
Yep. Ugh. Um, yeah. So, Diego and Bree do start contemplating why they were made and start having like some conversations around that. But then they head back to the house and they race back to be specific. And when they get there, the house is gone, which is a tragedy because it was the only house on an island outside of Seattle. It's probably a great house.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, yeah, Bree starts freaking out at this point, and we quickly realize it's because it's almost daylight, and she does not think they can survive in the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Which I wasn't too surprised by that. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Because originally I was like, what
Yeah.
is keeping all these vampires like together living in the same place, like versus going off on their own. So that checks out that they were lying about that. But
Yeah. Yeah. It is I think that's a strategic move of Victoria and Riley. I will say if there's any place to be a sparkling little glow ball, it would be in the middle of the ocean because people would just be like, I don't know, it sparkles off the waves.
yeah, yeah. I'm also curious, did you think um that Riley was also lying, or did you think that Victoria was also lying to Riley about it?
I could not decide. I also have that question to ask you at some point here. I think it's later when they start testing it out. But I kind of went back and forth. I leaned more towards Riley was also lying to them, um, because he was like going out more. But yeah, I could see he's so young. It's so hard to know because he's like a year old maybe. Like he still is a newborn vampire himself.
I had the same thought, like I was kind of going back and forth, but leaning towards that he probably did know. And
Hmm.
especially with some events later on that I'm like, oh yeah, probably. So
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Um, yeah. Okay, then Diego says he knows a spot. They go to an underwater slash not underwater cave. The entrance to the cave is underwater, but the cave itself is not. Though it could have been, and they would have been fine. So
it
complicated.
would have been a little uncomfortable after a little couple hours. I think she said something about them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We also learned there that Bree got her arm ripped off. Diego got hit the bottom of his leg ripped off. Apparently, this is a normal thing that happens in this group of newborn vampires.
Which had me questioning, did Jasper ever have a limb that he lost? Like, we learn he's covered in scars, but we don't learn, like, that specifically. He must have at some point.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, must have. I mean, and it has to be somewhat common because it's common enough knowledge that Victoria knows how and teaches Riley to tell the other vampires how to heal and
yeah.
like replace their limbs.
Yeah.
So yeah, which apparently it's their venom, and you have to lick the wound
I
and
just, that
stick it
was
back on.
insane when I learned that because I never thought much about how they did it. I was like, I wonder if we'll learn that. And then when I learned it, I'm like, that's how they just like lick it and stick it back on. Like,
Yeah, so weird to me. So
yeah,
weird. Yeah, the magical like super healing powers I feel like are so normal throughout fantasy as a genre that I like also did not think about it. Like I wasn't like, so do they regrow limbs? Like
yeah.
what's up, you know? Um but yeah, I was not expecting them to lick and stick their limbs back on.
Oh man.
So, so weird. I have more comments about this with the hair that gets pulled out later too, because that's a whole other thing. But we'll get to that. Um, yeah. We also have a comment that Diego smells sweet like all vampires, but specifically like cinnamon and or cloves. And this is hilarious to me because it is now, I don't know if you've seen the videos, but I feel like it's a fantasy cliche that the love interest always smells of cinnamon.
I haven't seen them, but yeah, that sounds accurate. It does.
Yeah, I think it's cinnamon or pine trees. He always smells like one of the two,
Thrown a
which,
glass. So I just when you said pine trees, I'm like,
yeah, yeah, Throne of Glass is a pine tree one. But that's the only one I think she has.
yeah.
Rhysand smells like jasmine, which is a very feminine scent, but
No, I'm just thinking about that. I don't want to spoil things for Throne of Glass anymore though.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, anyways, so that was just like a fun little like, haha, love that. Here's love the cliches.
Yeah.
Yeah, Diego and Bree also open up and share their stories of being dregs or kids that wouldn't have gone missing. And Diego has like a very dramatic story with a gang fight, and Riley comes in and is like, "You want a new life, kid?" And Bree, he's like, "You want a burger, kid?" Because she's starving. And Bree
That comparison, the way you did that, it's accurate, but
is like so bummed that like her story is so much more lame.
oh my God. Yeah,
So
I had a comment here though, because like Diego says something about how it's hard to remember some stuff because everything's so fuzzy and dark. And I thought this was so interesting because I assumed that Edward didn't remember much of his human life because of how long ago it was, rather than like it being something with turning, which I'm also curious because I feel like, and then like Alice obviously doesn't remember her human life at all, but I thought that had to do more with like her mental health.
mhm.
Versus, like, I feel like the other people, at least like Rosalie and Carlisle and Esme, we get a decent amount of background on. I don't know.
We all remember. And maybe it's one of those things like, again, I love to make up things to fill in the plot holes for Stephenie. So here we go again. Maybe it's one of those things like the older you are, like if you spend time focusing on it, it can be clear again. Where if you don't, it like stays fuzzy, like in the same way that Bree talks about like when she talks to Diego, all of a sudden she feels like clear headed, but she's been just focused on like, being thirsty and hasn't like had any thoughts or like critical thinking basically. So I wonder if it's kind of the same thing because that would check that Rosalie and
Yeah.
Carlisle and Esme all had significant things from their human life that impacts them as a vampire. And Esme specifically, because she was in love with Carlisle and then marries him as a vampire,
Yeah.
where Edward, from what we know, doesn't seem very attached to his old human life. There's not a lot that happens that really impacts him beyond like the time period he was raised in, making him like more of a old school gentleman character. That's kind of all we get from like his past influencing him.
Yeah. Yeah,
Not
most of the
Hitler.
time when you have a theory like that, I tend to disagree with something about it, but that one I think is a pretty solid theory. So I'm with you on that one.
I think I'm
Holds
generally
up-
right.
It holds up for all those characters pretty well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and obviously Bella, things are like not fuzzy that I remember, but she's like
Yeah.
one of the only vampires who's interacting with her human life still as a vampire. So,
That is, I actually had that question when I was like writing a note about this. I'm like, why doesn't Bella experience this? But it makes total sense that she's still basically in that same life.
mhm, yeah, yeah.
All right. So the next paragraph in the summary. They track their fellow vampires to a remote cabin where Riley has gathered the gang. Bree knows the life she leads is violent and unstable. All of Riley's gang are newborn vampires, and they're out of control and attack each other with little provocation. Diego encounters one of the gang and fights with them. When Riley emerges from the cabin, they follow him, believing he is going to meet with Victoria. This turns out to be true, and they listen in on a conversation. Victoria is planning to attack the Cullen clan in revenge for the death of her lover James. The Volturi, a vampire clan that enforces the rules of modern vampire life, arrive. They accuse Victoria of trying to create an army of vampires beholden to her and threaten to punish her. Then they offer an alternative to use her army to attack and destroy the Cullen clan of vampires. They give Victoria 5 days to do so, or she will be executed. I don't know if I fully agree with all of that description, but all right. I don't know, just the way that the Volturi like told her what she should do. I'm like, she kind of already was doing that, but whatever.
Yeah, yeah. They like allowed it,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, yeah. So, to pick up and bridge the gap between those two a little bit, um, is, kind of covered at the end of the last chapter, but they basically decide to start testing superstitions, realizing like everything that they believe about vampires from the lore is not all true, and realize they can be in light. And we get another description saying the rainbow light, which every time I read it, I think of a sun catcher thing or like one of those prisms you hang in your window
Mhm.
that shoots rainbows everywhere. And like that's always what I imagine for them for the Twilight vampires, which I always have been like, people would not run away and flee from that. Like, but then they specifically have another line that says it would look like we were on fire to any humans. And it's just like like their perception makes them feel beautiful and sparkly. I don't know. I just feel like it's so confusing how she describes this. Like, she wants two different things. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I feel like the imagery gets like confusing and yeah, it is described that way in this book too, isn't it? Both ways. Because I think we talked about this back when we did the tandem read, and
Mm-hmm.
it was the difference between Bella's description of Edward and Edward's description. And I thought I had a solid theory there about Edward's description being like more frightening or whatever, and Bella like it being more appealing. But they do describe it both ways in this book too. So yeah.
Yeah. And we could like make the argument again that Diego and Bree are in love. They're seeing each other. Like this is the moment she's like, "Oh my gosh, I want him more than just a friend," you know? Um, but the problem with that is later we find out when the vampires, their like whole coven goes into the light, they all are admiring their own beauty.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it just, I don't know. I just think it's like confusing. I would never describe a fire pit as sparkly, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I think it's confusing about the whole looking like they're on fire thing because I get that like humans could potentially be freaked out because if I just saw someone walking down the street like that, I'd be like, what's going on? Like
Yeah,
that's normal, but I wouldn't think, oh, they're on fire. Like
right. No one has looked at a disco ball and said, fire, fire, flee. No one.
I bet someone has, but not a lot of people.
Only people on drugs. I don't know.
They're people.
True, but we're not just assuming people actively using are looking at vampires.
All right, tangent. Let's
Oh, yeah. Anyway, so there's that. Also, Diego kisses her, and then they go find the group. So now we're caught up. Now we're caught up to the description we just read.
yeah, they did kind of skip over those couple things, but
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you say they said they like experiment with the superstition stuff, but we don't get like the
no,
conclusion.
yeah, that's true.
So, yeah. Um yeah. Um anyways, oh, they also decide not to tell Riley at this point about the light, which is Bree's idea, and Diego does not feel good about.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Because I don't even remember what I read, but we do learn that Diego is like Riley's right hand
yeah,
person.
like
So
kind of like the second in command,
yeah.
more or less, though
Yeah.
not officially. Um, yeah. The next thing I want to talk about, beyond like there, we get some vampire rivalries that are happening between the covens or between in the coven between some vampire groups. But I want to talk about Fred because
Same.
we discover in this section Fred has what I think is the power of disgust, which later I'm like, maybe disgust, maybe something else, but this is interesting, I thought. So tell me your thoughts on Fred.
No, I thought it was a really interesting power to have. Like they talk about that there's like a wave of revulsion that's so overpowering that like people like can't be around him, which is a really interesting power to have. And it's too bad he didn't go well, spoilers. I mean, it's this episode because it's all one episode. But he doesn't go to the battle because I'm like, that'd be really interesting to see how that plays out. But
Yeah, yeah. I am like, I hope the Cullens meet Fred at some point. Be
I
so
know.
she left it open, and there's some
That's
things.
right. There are two more books. I was like, I hate to tell you, but they don't. But who knows? Maybe they do.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know they don't in Breaking Dawn, and
Yeah,
I'm assuming not in Life and Death.
that'd be
So,
pretty weird since he wasn't even around yet. But it'd be Francis instead of Fred. Gender swap.
oh, right, of course. Oh, yeah. Um, doo, 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 doo. Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. I also was curious, what is Bree's power? We don't get an answer to this. And in fact, I feel like Stephenie kind of covers herself by saying only 1 in 50 vampires get a talent, is how she calls them in this book, which is just not what I was led to believe, because every single vampire we've met in the Twilight universe has one until this book.
Yeah, no, and Edward even says in Twilight, he says that they all have powers. Like, he says that they all have something from their life. Like, so I
Yeah,
don't know. I Googled about this because I'm like, am I misremembering this? I'm like, nope, I'm not, but I don't know if Edward was exaggerating or the way it was stated wasn't. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like it's more likely that Victoria has lied to to Riley and told him it's not common, because she wants to make it clear that she's more powerful than all of them.
That's a good point. I could also see where it's not necessarily picked up by like every vampire that everyone does have a power because there's such like varying um I don't know what the word is. Varying powers, I guess. That
Like when you look at Esme, Carlisle, and Rosalie, they're all pretty subtle,
yeah. Even
and
Emmett,
her,
because like all vampires have super strength. He's just more strong, you know?
right. Yeah. So, yeah, I also could see it being like a thing that's like, it only super strong powers manifest before a year or something like that, but we're not totally led to believe that. A little, yeah, I don't know. We know that Alice has her powers right away. I think we know Edward has his powers right away too, right?
Yeah, because it talks about with Carlisle when he changes them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I oh, what was I gonna say? I completely forgot. Oh yeah, when she's talking about Fred and like hiding behind Fred and like her powering through the revulsion, I thought it had something to do with her power. I didn't realize at first that it was his power. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, so mostly it sounds like it's a plot hole, and or just inconsistent. Yeah.
I also, when in my Googling, I did see someone did the math of all the Twilight characters we have and how many of them have powers, and it definitely doesn't hold up with the numbers we get because it's like 60% of them have powers of all of the vampires that we see in the whole series. So,
Yeah. That checks out. I
yeah,
believe it's 60%, even if you don't count Carlisle and Esme's powers.
yeah,
you know, like, yeah, yeah. Because Esme particularly is like a personality trait,
yeah.
more than anything else. Anyways, I also think it's really okay. No, never mind. I'm jumping ahead of myself. So first, um, Diego and Bree decide they're going to go track Riley when he leaves. And Diego says they're going to go track him and then tell him about that they can be in light, like in the light. But he is a little nervous about how that's going to be received. So just to be safe, he wants Bree to hide in the treetops and follow from there, so they won't catch her scent. This also is a plot hole to me. Like, why can they not smell her in the trees versus on the ground?
Yeah, I didn't think much about it, but like, I don't know, all the ones that have caught the scent they've been like on the same level of it. I didn't think it was that much of a plot hole myself, but
Mm.
because
I
she was
just,
in the trees the whole time, versus yeah.
yeah, I just think like Edward could have freaking carried Bella through the woods then. Like we didn't need to do this whole Jacob run around with a werewolf thing if he could have just climbed in the trees and they wouldn't have found him.
I think that's valid. I do think that's valid.
So yeah. Anyways, either way, clearly we already know she's only focused on the character's perspective she's writing. She's admitted it. So clear example
I
there.
know it's interesting to have that specific perspective from her. Like it's like, oh, okay, so this we are reading this right. You just didn't pay attention to this detail.
Yeah. Yeah. You're just focused on your characters, which is so ironic because they have no arcs, but whatever. We won't go into that.
No, I felt that even more because I've only been reading Twilight, and then I read Throne of Glass, and I'm like, all of these characters have arcs. So you go from
And there's a lot of
Twilight, like it's so different.
and there's a lot of characters in that one. And the main characters don't have arcs in Twilight.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's such a bummer. Okay. Yeah. So we catch up to Riley, and he's met Victoria in a gingerbread house in the woods where they're meeting out.
I was just thinking of because I just watched it, Shrek 2, when Shrek and Fiona go on their honeymoon in the gingerbread house at the beginning opening credits. That's what my mind was doing.
I thought it was like a Hansel and Gretel witch thing. Again, why is this detail in there? It makes no sense.
It's so irrelevant. So irrelevant.
So irrelevant. Why? Why would you just make this at this weird gingerbread house scene?
I'm trying to think of what would possibly be relevant about it, and I got nothing. Like
the only reason is there's an actual specific house outside of Seattle, and Stephenie Meyer's invested in that Airbnb, and she wanted the money.
The only we have an answer. We have an answer.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, yeah. In this moment, while in the trees, we get a little flashback because Bree remembers exactly how she was turned. Like shot for shot. She remembers every moment of this, which I'm trying to remember if how clearly does Edward remember being turned? Because that's the most clear example we would get. Do you feel like it's that clear?
I don't know. He just talks a lot about the pain. I feel like we don't actually hear about it because he's avoiding telling Bella because of how painful it was. So I don't know if he.
I was just trying to think at Midnight Sun. But also he was really sick. Like I guess the people we get their point of view from are like basically dying or dead.
Yeah.
Like nearly dead when we get their perspective. Because Alex also is pretty hazy on her being turned. Anyways, all that to say, I was surprised.
So yeah.
Right. I was pretty surprised to remember that Bree remembered like everything that had happened when she turned. Because we get a very like vivid picture of Riley bringing her to this dark house and Victoria's voice and exactly what she said. And then like we find out that apparently Riley brought her a bunch of other people that day. We don't know how many, but Victoria killed all of them because she couldn't stop. So she thinks she'll be able to make it with Bree because she's so full that she thinks she'll be able to stop, which is also crazy. But I do like that detail also because we get such a picture that it's like easy for Carlisle and we're led to believe it's like hard for other people. Like everyone else is very nervous about turning Bella except for Carlisle, and I feel like even Edward would be, except for that he pulled all that venom out of her earlier, So, yeah. So I think that is actually staying consistent. But I did find it kind of disturbing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, how many vampires did she try to turn to end up with 22?
Yeah. That is
Probably like
funny to think
60
about.
people.
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's
Yeah. And we know a bunch of the vampires die every time they introduce a new group. So you probably have like 100, at least 100 people.
yeah. Yeah.
Crazy. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Do you have anything else you want to add from this section until my next note is about the Volturi coming?
Yeah, I have one note before that, and it was just because I was questioning about why the vampires didn't leave, and they kind of, I mean, we talked about the sun stuff, but also it's talked about, Riley says something about how they don't think, and if they like start to think he can distract them with their thirst, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So that was
Mhm.
just a detail that I highlighted, but the next
Yeah.
thing I have is the Volturi coming, which they describe as four figures crossing an open field, and I'm like, are there werewolves in this? I did not think about the Volturi, but I was like, what? But no, it's the Volturi.
Can you imagine werewolves in cloaks? It'd be
Oh,
so
they
cute.
just said four figures at first. It said nothing about cloaks, because when they
For
said
the
cloak,
dogs in cloaks. It'd be so cute. Oh yeah. Yeah, this is like the big twist in the book
hmm
was the Volturi were in on it.
yeah, because we like knew that they were probably aware of what happened, like that there was this going on, but we didn't know that they actually saw and had already talked to Victoria. So,
Yeah, yeah. Like Edward throws some shade at them in a clips that leads us to believe he knows that they were aware and chose when they showed up intentionally. But we don't know overtly that they straight up were not working with Victoria, but like
I mean,
that, that
pretty much.
yeah, and that they legitimately were like, no, we're gonna let this happen because we want the Cullens killed, and that
Yeah.
it was not overt, you know. So yeah, I thought that was very interesting. I was a little surprised, to be honest.
Yeah, I was too. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah,
I didn't think we were gonna get any of the characters from the main series until like the battle. So,
yeah, yeah,
except Victoria maybe, but and obviously, yeah, Riley, but
yeah. And we barely got, I was actually kind of hoping for more about Victoria. We barely got anything about her.
yeah, see, I was initially hoping for more Victoria, but like the last section that we read of Eclipse when it talked about that they didn't even know her name, I'm like, oh, we're not getting much Victoria. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but
No, it makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We find out the Volturi give them 5 days to attack the Cullens. If Victoria has not had her army attack the Cullens in 5 days, the Volturi are coming back to kill all of them. And we also have Jane specifically tell Victoria to impress them with how well they killed the Cullens. So,
Which I'm now
yep,
just thinking about, I'm like, the Volturi aren't aware of the werewolves, but Victoria definitely is. Well, I guess that she isn't aware that they would ever team up. Never mind. There goes that. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
It still feels like a piece of info she could have used as maybe like a bargaining chip, maybe. But I guess, yeah, because she knows they attacked her together, you know? Like, even if she doesn't think they teamed up, she was like on the line and they were
That's
both
right.
going at each other. So she's seen them both attack her together. She's just taken advantage of the like treaty line.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing together. I don't know if you can say together because of the treaty line thing, and they were very actively avoiding one another. So, yeah, I feel like she should have thought more about it for sure, but also like she would never expect that they would team up, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Anyways, interesting, interesting. Still feels like it could have been a bargaining chip. So, yep. Um, yeah. We then get Bree dashes back to the house. Diego is going to stay and tell Riley. Um, Later, Riley shows up. Diego is not with him. But
Um, we are getting ahead of the description now, but and I had a note that I thought it was so stupid for Diego to still tell Riley. I'm like, this is a horrible plan before he even goes and does it. But um, should I
yeah,
read the description then?
read the description.
Bree goes back to the cabin and decides the time has come to run and be on her own. Diego stays behind to talk to Riley. Riley returns to the cabin alone and tells the gang about the Cullens and tells them that they will have to learn to fight to survive. He tells Bree that Diego has gone off to spy with Victoria but will return. Riley then announces that fight training will begin. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a little bit shorter. Also, I feel bad for the kids using this to cheat. I don't know what school is doing summaries of the short second life of Bree Tanner. Probably none. But that leads you to believe that Bree has decided to go off on her own, like apart from the coven, which is not true. She's just going back to the coven by herself.
Yeah.
Anyways, doesn't matter. Because
I
again,
mean, yeah. I think it doesn't maybe say in the next paragraph. I don't know. It makes it clear in the next paragraph that she doesn't go off on her own. But and she does think about like actually going off on her own. She just doesn't follow through with it.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it is
yeah. Which she should have. Sad,
I
but
know.
her loyalty to Diego.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Okay. So Riley comes back. Diego is not with him. And he is pissed. He's so angry. He's super intense. He's ripping people's arms off. Oh, this is where we get the question. Okay, so now this is where we find out that they can use their venom and lick their body parts and stick them back on. But it says for Sarah, or whatever the generic name of this vampire was, she lost an ear and a chunk of her hair, but she can't reattach her hair. So it says she will just have a bald spot. So is the assumption like because their bodies have stopped, like she can't even grow more hair?
I mean, I hadn't given it a lot of thought, but yeah, that makes sense, I think. You know?
I guess, but what if you had a terrible haircut? You can never grow more hair. And
That is why in the movies they all wear wigs. I'm just kidding. It's definitely not, but they do a lot of them wear wigs in the movies.
oh, great. I was like, this just like whatever haircut you got at whatever age you were at, like it's just staying like that for forever. I don't
Yeah,
know. I
I
just
don't
feel
know.
like maybe that's crazy. Maybe that's not a big deal at all, and haircuts don't change that much. But uh, just a little wild to me. Like Alice always is gonna have a pixie cut now.
Yep, I guess.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, convenient, I guess. You don't have to trim your hair when whatever. We don't need to
I
talk
love
about.
with all of the things with being a vampire, this is the one that you're stuck on.
I just,
They don't get to grow their hair out.
I
Uh,
yeah, I just hadn't thought about it.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I get it makes sense, I guess. But yeah. Um. Yeah. Riley's gonna teach them to fight. He also tells them a little bit about the Cullens. Um. However, I take issue here because he tells them about Edward's powers, but not Alice's?
Same. I was like, why? Why? What do you
This
mean?
makes no sense. This makes no sense. And the whole thing is that Victoria has been so clever to avoid Alice seeing this future by intentionally not deciding anything. So shouldn't she like say something about them?
My only
I think
thought is it
Alice does figure it out, but
Yeah. My only thought is that it's constantly talked about how dumb some of them are, so maybe he just didn't want to go into trying to explain that because it's a little more complicated than her just seeing the future, but still, yeah, I was definitely the same page. I'm like, why did you not say Alice is? I don't know.
yeah, I just thought that was weird, and specifically in the fighting context,
Yeah.
somebody who can see the future is just as dangerous as someone who can read minds.
Yeah.
Or just to give the example that they all have like crazy abilities and they're all dangerous, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It seems like they kind of brushed over that one. I also had questions here about Riley's talking about how Seattle was once theirs, but they moved on a long time ago and now they're jealous and want to take over again. And I'm like, does Riley think this is actually true? Like, he probably
Mm,
doesn't, right? Because he knows that they're established in Forks because he goes to like where Bella is staying and stuff. But
yeah. No, I don't think he thinks this is true because he put such a huge emphasis on them just tracking Bella that it's clear Riley is on the same page that the real goal is that Bella dies more than that they kill any of the Cullens. Because that's what Victoria wants. She wants Bella dead. She's fine to like knock out the Cullens, but she wants Bella.
how much of that does he actually know? Because the reason that she wants to kill her is for revenge for James, and he clearly knows nothing about James because Edward tells him about that, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't know. I just think like Victoria has made it clear that like Bella is like a target, you know?
Yeah.
And James
I'm just
James
curious what he thinks like the objective is, like what the reasoning is, because doesn't have he obviously doesn't think it's what he's telling them, but he also doesn't have the full picture of what Victoria actually wants to do. So, but
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It
I
does
don't
make me
think
want
there's
to go.
necessarily an answer, but
Yeah, I want to go back and read the section of Eclipse where it's like Edward, Bella, Victoria, Riley, because I feel like that would be interesting now with more context,
yeah, yeah.
to see again. But yeah, I didn't before this, so what a time. Um, yeah, and then he starts teaching them about fighting. And then yeah, Riley does pull aside Bree and gives her this story about Diego that Amy read in the description, and Bree totally believes this. Did you believe this? Did you think Diego was alive or dead?
I was constantly going back and forth. Immediately, at first, I was like dead, and I was also shocked that Riley pulled her aside during this. But then, when he talks about like he has some line talking about their handshake or whatever, and I'm like, oh, Diego probably said that as code to like say that he's okay, kind of thing. So that made me think he was alive. But then, as time went on, I'm like, nah, he's definitely dead. Like I kept going back and forth. What about you?
Yeah. I thought he was alive because of all the stuff about the ninja club and
Yeah.
all the best friend handshake stuff, which
Which
really
I'm
makes
still confused about. I'm still
yes,
confused.
yes. I'm like, so did they specifically like torture him and ask for info on Bree? That doesn't make sense.
I could see like that he like brought this to Riley and Riley approached it more casually and got more information about it and then brought him to Victoria where they like tortured him. I think that's probably more likely, but
That's like the most plausible.
yeah.
Either way, a little weird.
Yeah. I'm also kind of surprised that Riley like brought him to Victoria because it's pretty clear that Riley actually like liked him and stuff. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like that's addressed later when Bree realizes that Diego's been dead the whole time. You
Okay.
know? Do you know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Which we'll obviously get to, but I do think we honestly more from Eclipse than we get in this book. I do think Riley genuinely was very in love with Victoria and really thought like she was his like mate and was doing whatever to make her happy because he thought they were this like bonded pair. And he
Yeah.
spent months being her number two and her like manipulating him to thinking like this was all for the two of them, you know? So I think it's like a thing like that that he got manipulated into. So, yeah. Do you want to? I think that's the uh, end of that paragraph. Do you want to go ahead and read the next one?
Sure. This is another shorter paragraph too. 3 nights of training go by. Riley leads the gang to a ferry and they attack passengers and kill them for sustenance. Riley tells them that the Cullens keep a human as a pet, Bella Swan. Um, he gives them Bella's scent for tracking and tells them they can have her for food when the Cullens are destroyed.
Yep. I thought this boat scene was pretty friggin' disturbing.
It was. It really, really was. Yeah. And also, like, I'm sorry, so conspicuous. Like, even if it's the dead of night and a ferry goes down, people are gonna see that happen. Like,
Yeah,
they're going to see that happen.
only
And there's
plausible.
going to be questions about it. And the fact that no survivors from a ferry boat accident, that's insane.
Yeah, like what happened? What did it
Yeah,
hit?
yeah.
Everyone is
Did nobody
dismembered.
get away?
Yeah, the boat is shredded.
Yeah,
Yep,
questionable. Very questionable.
very questionable. I did think in this section, is that what happened to the Titanic?
It wasn't an iceberg, it was vampire.
Yes.
Those aquatic ones that are super strong because they beat up killer whales.
They would lose to the killer whales. That's
They
no,
win
that
against the Titanic.
yeah.
I love it.
Oh man. Oh yeah. Yeah, so that was pretty freaking disturbing. We'll just move right along. Then they get Bella sent. Everybody's obsessed with her. Surprise, surprise. Um, and then we get the lovely line that it's fine that they can go in the sunlight for 4 days of the year.
Yeah. I was like, this is so stupid. But then I also I mean, it doesn't make any sense no matter what. But I was like, they were just in the sunlight a couple days ago, but he doesn't realize that Bree was there. So I
Yeah,
guess,
no,
shouldn't he realize Bree was there? He should.
yeah, he should,
Yeah.
but we're not led to believe he does.
Well, no, he knows that Bree was with in the cave.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's no reason he shouldn't.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah. My only thought is he just thinks Bree is he's able to manipulate her and thinks like none of them even will think, you know, like she only cares about being like
Yeah.
hungry. And he wants her because she's the only one who's connected to Fred, and he really wants Fred
Yeah.
in the army, you know?
Yeah. I suppose.
So that's my only reason to like sweep that under the rug, but it's another pretty big plot hole. I'm bummed we're at like the count of like three for like large plot holes
Yeah.
in a
It,
170-page book.
yeah, it makes more sense knowing Stephenie's writing process. But yeah, it's a bit of a bummer. But
Yeah, yeah. Oh man.
um should I read the next paragraph? Because we kind of got.
Read it.
Uh, okay. The gang goes to attack the Cullens. One vampire, Fred, flees to Canada, telling Bree he will wait one day to see if she wants to come with him. Bree isn't interested in attacking the Cullens, but hopes to see Diego and so participates. Riley leaves, telling Bree that he has other business, that Diego is already there. That he has other business, but that Diego is already there fighting. When Bree gets to the location, she finds that the Cullens easily defeating the newborn vampires, slaughtering them. She cannot detect any scent of Diego and assumes Victoria killed him the previous night. She is distraught by this realization. Should I just read the rest of it
Uh,
or
yeah,
not?
go for
Okay.
it.
Bree's captured by the Cullens. That's a little extreme, but who argue whether she should be executed or not. They decide to hold her prisoner and wait the Volturi. Bree hears howling, but does not know about the werewolves. She sees Bella and has a powerful urge to attack her and drink her blood. The Volturi arrive, and Bree learns that she and the other newborns were created illegally by Victoria. Bree is tortured by one of the Volturi named Jane. Bree acts as if she is stupid and confused and blames Riley, telling the Volturi that she obeyed because she feared death. The Volturi decide that Bree must be executed, but the Cullens surprisingly intervene, saying that they will take responsibility for her, that she is blameless because no one taught her the rules. The Volturi refuse, telling the Cullens that if they spare her, their reputation as enforcers of vampire law will be diluted. Um, One of the Cullens, Edward, tells Bella to close her eyes. Bree misunderstands and thinks he is speaking to her. She closes her eyes, thinking of Diego, realizing that she was in love with him. The Volturi attack and kill her. It's a sad ending. It's a sad ending to the book, so.
All right. Yeah. All right. So let's jump into the rest of the book.
Yeah.
uh, and we'll just go toward until the end. Um, yeah. So they go to the fight. Fred leaves. I hope we see Fred in one of the next two books.
I do too.
He's a super interesting character. We've gotten like no info.
I know. Yeah. I was just thinking, I'm sure it won't be based on him because to make a spin-off of from a character that's from a spin-off, is kind of
Yeah.
unlikely,
No,
but I could see
I
him in it
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. I think it would be satisfying if like somehow he crosses the Cullens path
Yeah.
and then they're like, what is this weird power? And
Yeah.
but then we all know. Those are very satisfying moments as a reader, you know?
Yeah. I agree.
Yep. Yep. Um yeah. So they're all heading down to go get the Cullens. This felt very abrupt to me. I
Same.
know they literally had a couple days, but like those days just blipped on by.
Mhm.
So yeah. Um, Before they're at the actual battle, they split up because they have caught Bella's scent and everyone is in a frenzy and Riley is just adding to the frenzy. And he tells both of the groups that are splitting up that he's going with the other person. And Bree is the only one who catches him in this. Uh, yeah, which he starts to try to justify to her and then ends up telling her kind of the truth that like he hasn't like caught Victoria's trail and so he has to go find her and then is being very manipulative and lying to her saying didn't you catch Diego's trail like he's already there just go like just go you know so yeah I thought this was interesting like he lied he told the truth he lied again you know so yeah yeah anyways there's that yep so Riley abandons them to go find Victoria. And then the fight is happening, and mid-fight, somehow Bree does avoid like basically the entire fight. She like has zero conflict with
Yeah.
anyone.
Just she avoids the fight because she was talking to Riley for a minute. I'm like, I
Yeah,
don't know. And
short.
somehow never learns that there's werewolves. Just that I
Yeah,
was like, really? Really?
Yeah, like she doesn't see them at all on the battlefield. Although they kind of explain this, saying they split up and the werewolves took Christie's group, was my interpretation.
Yeah, I still
And
just find it hard to believe that she didn't at all see them.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. I mean, she definitely knows some the weird howlers that
Yeah,
she
she
keeps.
thinks there's howler vampires, which just had me think of howler monkeys, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's funny. Um, yeah, I think the explanation that she misses the entire fight is such a bummer. Okay, here's my theory on this. I think Stephenie Meyers hates writing action scenes.
Yep, yep.
She creates these elaborate things to not have to like have the tension building. Like she knows this is what you have to do for like a plot, although it's not, but like she structures her plot around these intense battles and then does everything to not have to write the battles.
It's really true. I wonder if like people were excited to make the movie then because like they knew there was these action scenes, but they didn't get much detail about what happened. So like we can do whatever we want. Like,
Yes.
which
Okay.
they definitely do when you think of Breaking Dawn. So
Yes. They literally do. But ironically, that's the only one Stephenie Meyers is involved with.
I
So
know. Yeah. It's
whatever.
interesting.
Yeah. Okay, but literally, okay, she avoids the action sequence in Twilight, and it kind of makes sense. She totally avoids the action sequence in Midnight Sun by having it happen outside.
Classic car chase.
Barely makes sense, except that Edward is like so focused on Bella that like he doesn't engage. So okay, we get hints of it, you know. Um, New Moon, is there a big? There's not a big battle fight thing. The
No.
most is like the confrontation. So there's that. But there's not like a big fight scene. It's like tense because of the like political intrigue. See, there,
Yeah.
a great example where you can have tension and not have to have it be a battle.
Yeah.
Moon.
I'm like I'm trying to think and I'm like I've literally forgot the plot of New Moon already.
Tension point building to them in Italy.
Right, right, right. Italy.
But there's no battle.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay.
Eclipse, we totally missed the battle, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And now in The Secret Life of Bree Tanner, we've 100% missed the battle.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's another battle coming in Breaking Dawn, so I'm just going to have a real giggle when I.
My thing is though, I don't remember much of the real battle in Breaking Dawn, you know?
No, that's true. I feel like I do remember in the book the lineup and them getting ready for the battle, but I don't remember what actually happens in the book. I just think of the movie
I
scene.
know. Same.
So iconic, and I was so outraged they
Yeah,
had
yeah,
changed it so much.
yeah. Uh,
But
yeah.
then I'm like, I
Oh,
was
I'm
so,
excited for when we get there. That's
no,
the one episode we're going to talk a lot about the movie.
yeah, it is. It is. Yeah. Also, I think it's Peacock that just added all the Twilight movies to their streaming services.
I did see that.
So, yeah, for anyone that has been just reading because they haven't had access to the movies, if you have Peacock, there you go. Also, Peacock is one of the cheaper streaming services. So, compared to Hulu, I guess it's just cheaper. Everything's cheaper than Hulu.
Yeah.
Anyways, we're not here to talk about how overpriced Hulu is. Um, so, where are we at in my notes? Oh, Bree realizes Diego was never there. And in fact, when Riley came back and was so cold and harsh, and he described vividly how Victoria was going to murder them if they like disobeyed him, he actually was describing Diego's murder and this turning point that like cut out the warmth in him and made him a cold-blooded vampire killer. That's
Yeah,
that.
I didn't put this together until she put it together that it was specifically describing Diego, and I'm like, oh, that kind of breaks my heart. I like Diego.
Yeah, I didn't either, and I also thought that was sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I thought that was, I mean, for a book that we knew the ending, it was a decent twist.
Yeah. I
I'm like,
did have a theory earlier on because I knew that two of the vampires, like, I don't know, she said something about that they got in a fight or they didn't make it there or whatever. And I
uh-huh.
had a theory that it was Diego and Fred who did not end up there. And they both did not end up there. So,
Yeah, that's
but
interesting.
yeah.
Mhm.
So,
I feel like both of them have stopped in the fight. Whatever, it doesn't matter. That's a theory. Makes sense. It would have been interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, at this point, uh, Bree just kind of collapses and the battle ends. Like Carlisle makes eye contact with her. He comes over to kill her, and she's like, I don't want to fight. I'm sorry we believed Riley. Carlisle's like, I don't want to fight. I'm sorry you've been manipulated. Uh,
I don't know who Riley is, but
yeah, but you say you're not going to hurt us and you'll be safe. You'll be safe here, you know?
yeah.
Uh,
I was also
I,
confused at first because it was talking about the blonde first, the blonde vampire came up, and I thought it was Jasper at first, and I'm like, what is happening? But I, Carlisle.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It is funny to read their descriptions only based on their hair color because they don't reflect their hair color from the books in the movies.
I feel like they all pretty much do, except Edward. I'm like, he is not a redhead.
Yeah, he does not have dark red hair.
Yeah. And
For
I guess Alice has like brown hair rather than black, but
yeah, yeah. And Carlisle is blonde, but so is Rosalie.
yeah. And
And
Jasper.
is Jasper? He's kind of like a dirty blonde, isn't he?
I don't know. I'd say he's blonde. He's
Okay.
pretty blonde.
Why can't I think of Jasper's hair in the movie? I guess he's not in a ton of scenes in the movie, but still, whatever. Anyways, so it was just funny to like reread their description because I also was like, wait, who are we talking about? But then I was like, the only one who would be like pitying her in the middle of a battle is Carlisle.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah, yeah. So that's kind of that. Jasper is not happy about Carlisle's decision. I'll just say at this point, I did not take notes on anything we already knew from Eclipse because we talked about that last week.
Yeah. Same.
And
Same.
I feel like the summary was like clear enough. We don't need to cover that. So just so everyone knows, I'm just going to talk about things that were like relatively new information or perspective from Bree, which honestly is not a ton because
Yeah.
she is so shut down in the
I
end of the
did
book.
I did find it interesting in this section about how like Jasper's powers affected her because I feel like we don't see that much, and I was curious if that was because like Jasper uses his power more on strangers or people he perceives as threats. So like I feel like we saw a lot more of his power on her, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I also had a question about this. It's my next note, in fact, is that Bree talks about feeling an unnatural rage, but that she's too sad to do anything about it. And I am wondering if this is Jasper trying to enrage her so that she'll act out and he has a reason to kill her.
Oh, see, I did not perceive it that way at all. I thought that he was just pissed off that they were like going to take her, like, and not kill her because he thought that that would put them all at risk.
Hmm. So
That
you
was
think
how I
it
took
was
it.
just like Jasper unwillingly using his powers and just affecting her because like he's around her
Yeah, I
more.
hadn't put much thought into it, so I don't know if that is realistic or not, but that's what I assumed.
Hmm. I just feel like Jasper normally it's like intentional, like he chooses it. You're not just more affected because you're around him, you know? But I don't know. I'd have to rethink about that more. But yeah, I interpreted it as Jasper was intentionally enraging her because he didn't want to have to, he thought Carlisle was making the wrong call and he wanted to push her, hoping she would act out and he could kill her before the Volturi came. That was my interpretation of it.
Well, she also talks about at some point, I can't find the note, but feeling like anxious, which I also interpreted as
Yeah.
how Jasper was feeling. So I don't know.
Yeah, I did in that section also.
Yeah, I don't think I
Notes on
highlighted
it.
it.
Anyways, I'm curious. Dear listeners, let us know, what do you think?
Yeah, Dallas, what do you think?
It's Dallas. And other
And
listeners.
other listeners.
Oh man. Um yeah. So I don't know. Then we get a lot of Bree is putting things together that we already know, and there's a lot of scenes from Eclipse that are repeated here. Um, Bree is trying to figure out who the Volturi are because they show up, and she recognizes them obviously. Um, we get more stuff from Eclipse. My literal note there.
Yeah,
Uh,
I did think it was interesting when I guess you haven't quite gotten to this point, but like she connects that the Cullens don't fully know like what happened and how like the Volturi had met up with Victoria. I thought it was interesting because clearly the Volturi don't know that she knows that they met up. So she was very like intentionally like describing in her mind exactly what happened so that Edward would figure out what was going on, which she does make the connection that it's Edward who can read minds and yeah. And then Edward like defends her, which makes more sense having that context because I thought it was kind of odd in Eclipse that Edward was speaking up for her. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. I just thought that was a little odd, but it makes more sense with this context that like she had just given him all this information and was on their side of things. So,
yeah, I thought this was interesting too. That's also my next note. Although I did find the writing a little confusing. Like it felt like it was worded like she was going to tell Edward everything, but it wasn't clear that Edward overtly had heard her. I think we're led to believe that for sure. That that's how then Edward was suspicious of the Volturi and like why he defends her. So I do think that is what happened, but I just thought it was like worded kind of confusingly.
yeah,
I
it
don't know.
does specifically say there's a line like hopefully the mind reader was already in the know. So, yeah. It,
Yeah. Yeah. Um yeah. And then she also decides intentionally to hide the fact that the Cullens were partnered with the howling vampires. She
mm,
decides to keep that secret also from the Volturi, even though she's being tortured, and that's part of. She like instantly feels like she owes this huge debt to Edward because well to the whole group because they have been kinder to her and she feels safer with them than any other vampire she's met, but specifically to Edward for killing Victoria and Riley and that Diego was avenged. So then she feels like this obligation for like loyalty towards them. And mostly I just was like kind of bummed. Like she would have been a cool addition to
yeah.
like the Cullens.
I
Like
know. I was also pretty bummed because I'm like, it would be so interesting to have them all get the context from her and to see like what they thought about it and stuff. Like it, yeah, it'd be interesting.
and I mean, Stephenie Meyers basically admits that she regrets that she couldn't change the ending and that
Yeah,
that's like where the story had to end, you know?
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I get that. But yeah. Um, yeah. And then it ends with Bree saying that she hopes they'll find Fred and be nice to him. And she sends out the thought to Edward specifically be kind to him, which is just not helpful. But mostly I was like, tell him it's Fred. or like his description, or something. But she just says, be kind to him, which, whatever, she's about to die. It's okay. Yeah, and then she's killed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do find it kind of funny right now looking at my notes. My last note, like, it ends it's very sad how it ends. But my last note is that I thought it was so funny that she called the Volturi vampire cops.
Yeah, that's true.
So it also made me forget I skipped over one of my previous notes where Riley calls the vampire newborns babies. And I'm like, he thinks they're baby vamps too.
See, I didn't even register that was like funny because that's what I've been calling them every book. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yep. But yeah, that's the end of the short second life of Bree Tanner. I liked it. I think more than Eclipse. It was more satisfying to read. I liked some of the lore. Although I'm like, honestly, I think Victoria could be kind of an intriguing character, and we got nothing else on her.
Yeah.
Riley was less interesting than I thought he was going to be. But I thought Fred, Diego, and Bree, specifically Fred and Bree, were like both interesting characters. So,
It's kind of funny that we're more interested in some of the side characters we don't get much about again, because like it's Bree Tanner we didn't get much about now.
yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah. I mean, maybe that's because Stephenie's not great at writing arcs slash isn't writing arcs. And so then you can imagine a lot better arcs for the side characters
yeah,
than
I think that's valid.
actual characters.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
I did like this book and I liked learning about Bree and I thought she was a compelling character. Too bad she had to die. Disappointed we didn't get to see her as a human, but
Mm-hmm.
otherwise I liked it.
Yeah. It was a good little palate cleanse kind of break
Mhm.
between Eclipse and Breaking Dawn. It kind of made me realize how burned out I am on Twilight. So
It's like we've been doing this podcast for like 4 months or something.
I don't know, and have not been into the books that much. I feel like so far the book we have liked the most, for me, it is true. I don't know if you feel this way, is Midnight Sun.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it just was like not that into the tandem read because it was so repetitive and I'm not invested in their relationship kind of thing. Like yeah, I don't know. I don't know what my favorite would be right now, honestly. I
Yeah.
think the one that I rated the highest was Eclipse, but I don't know if that necessarily means it was my favorite.
I was hopeful Eclipse was going to be the point that I turned and started getting into the series, but then it was more love triangle than
Yeah,
the
I think
other.
I was just more into the lore of it. If you ignored the love triangle part, it
Yeah,
was for sure my favorite, but
yeah,
the love triangle part is a large part of it. So,
it's a large part. Yeah, so we'll see how I feel about Breaking Dawn. What a time! What a time!
I'm excited for Breaking Dawn because I feel like I remember some comical moments from the movies, and since they were in the movies, I'm like the book's gonna be even better. Like,
Yeah,
because like comical stuff has not translated well, but also that could just be because Stephenie Meyer's involvement with Breaking Dawn. I guess that makes sense, but
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Anyways, so we said it already in this episode, but we will take next week off. And then the following week, we will have a recording out for Breaking Dawn.
The
What?
chapters 1 through 7 and the first 55 minutes of the first movie. Because there's two movies, so longer
Right.
chunks of movies for
That makes sense. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm. It was like 55 minutes.
yeah, yeah,
Like half the month.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, great. Great. We'll see you guys next week then.
Thanks,
Not
everybody.
see you the
Bye.
week after.
Yeah, yeah.
Bye.